The Rabbit's Gift by Jessica Vitalis, a first chapter Friday read aloud video and interview with the Word Nerd. Today, as you listen, watch for the story quote that will appear on screen. Write it down, word by word, and then follow the instructions given to you by your teacher. Hi, my name is Zieba. Welcome to my channel, Learning with the Word Nerd, and another First Chapter Friday video. This week, I'm going to be reading to you from The Rabbit's Gift by Jessica Vitalis. Want to shout out real quick, thank you to Jessica and Green Willow Books for sending me a copy. This video is not sponsored by them, but obviously as a word nerd, I love free books, so thank you so much. This book is a companion novel to this book, The Wolf's Curse. And when we talk to Jessica in the interview right after I read to you, she's going to explain a little bit about what that is. What is a companion novel and how is it different than a sequel? But before we get to talking to Jessica, I'm going to read to you from The Rabbit's Gift. Rather than read you the blurb on the back of the book, I'm going to read you the author's notes that she put here in the front of this advanced reader copy. Sometimes there's a little letter in here that appears that doesn't always make it into the final copy of the book, and I find it so valuable. And in this case, I liked it better than the blurb. So that's what I'm going to share with you because it will tell us enough about the book anyways. Jessica says, "Dear readers, good fables are vivid, gripping, and fantastical, but their enduring popularity stems from the thought-provoking messages they encourage readers to ponder. And that's exactly the kind of story I hope you'll find woven into the pages of The Rabbit's Gift. This spin on French mythology examines the difference between heroes and villains by exploring themes that will resonate with modern readers. What role should science play in our society? What can we expect from our leaders? How do our familiar roles and our privilege or lack thereof shape us? How do our actions impact the world around us? My main characters, Quincy Rabbit and Fleurine d'Aubigné, certainly don't have all the answers. But it's my most fervent hope that you and your young readers will enjoy accompanying them on their literal and figurative journeys, traveling through a world in which human babies are grown in cabbage-like plants called Chou and delivered by rabbits. It is also my hope that you'll find yourself cheering for both Quincy and Fleurine as they try to save their futures and their country. In the words of Quincy Rabbit, happy hopping, Jessica Vitalis." Also, in addition to that reader's notes, we have a little prologue is even the right thing, but it's just a little message from the main character, Quincy. And he says, "I used to believe that every story had a hero and a villain. Take this story, for example. There was a time when I have insisted that the hero was me, Quincy Rabbit. Not that you'd know it by looking at me. I'm no Angora Rex or anything like that. But I am the one who saved the Warren, not to mention the future of Montpeyroux. If that's not heroic, I don't know what is. The problem is that I'm also the one who started the trouble in the first place. That's not to say it was all my fault. I had plenty of help, not from a rabbit, from a human named Fleurine d'Aubigné. Once I would have told you that she was the villain in the story, a stubborn, selfish, thoughtless villain, and I would have been partly right. But I would have been partly wrong, too, because I've learned that sometimes the only difference between a hero and a villain is which side you're on." Great thing to think about. All right, Chapter 1, The Rabbit's Gift by Jessica Vitalis. Chapter 1 is from Quincy's perspective. This book alternates between the perspectives of Quincy the rabbit and Fleurine. How do I say her name? Fleurine. Jessica put a note down here. d'Aubigné, a human girl. So this chapter 1, is in Quincy's perspective. "I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's go back to the days before I thought much about heroes and villains, to the days before I encountered the human world, to the days before I ever heard the name Fleurine d'Aubigné. In fact, let's go back to the morning Maman rose early to sort carrots at the far end of the burrow, waking me from a restless slumber. The story begins the moment I pulled myself from the heap of tangled limbs belonging to my 11 brothers and sisters and hopped to her side, taking care not to stumble in the dim morning light, trickling in from the burrow's only entrance. 'Good morning, greetings, good day,' I said. 'Good morning, greetings, good day,' Maman answered, gently pressing her sable forehead against mine, resting it on the white strip that started at my nose and ran the length of my otherwise black body. 'Can I help?' I asked. Maman twisted to lick at the graying fur on her arthritic hind leg and then continued taking inventory. I'm working on breakfast. Why don't you rouse the others? The Chou are waiting. My ears drooped at the mention of the long day to come. Maman always claimed that farming was honorable, that we were created by the great Maman Rabbit to be stewards of human life. But I didn't want to be stuck in the warren forever. If only the committee would assign me to transport duty, I'd be able to get out and see the world. I dreamed of crisscrossing the country in the complex system of underground tunnels I'd heard about but never seen. Transplanting Chou de vie, the returning with purple carrots we needed to survive. I imagined my siblings hunched at my feet, looking up at me with awe as I shared strange and wonderful stories filled with daring and intrigue. But my 12th birthday had come and gone, and I was no closer to being assigned to transport than I had been the year before. Perhaps next year, the committee said. You could still have a growth spurt, Maman said. What a bunch of rotten carrots. Sure, I was a runt, but I could manage a Chou de vie. Chou are the cabbage-like plants we grow here in the warren. Transport rabbits dig them up and deliver them to humans, who peel back the velvety purple leaves to find a human baby nestled inside. Besides, what I lack in strength and size, I more than make up for with my intelligence. Not to brag or anything, but I could calculate how many Chou we had planted faster than any other rabbit, and I was better than the committee keeping track of which rabbits were assigned to which tasks. Plus, I never forgot a single fact I ever heard. So what if I occasionally made small errors? I mean, yes, it could have ended poorly when I misjudged the depth of the water in the creek, but we pulled Sophie out before any real harm was done. As for mistaking the feathery greens of the tempest lace for purple carrot greens when we are foraging, anybody might have made that error. Anybody who'd never mixed them up and suffered a week of diarrhea, that is. How was I supposed to know purple carrots never grew in the wild? The truth of the matter was that nothing could happen in the human world that I couldn't handle if only the committee would give me the chance. I nosed one of my siblings, a foul mood settling over me like a swarm of pesky mosquitoes. 10 more twitches, Sophie mumbled as she rolled over and covered her eyes with her snow-white paws. She was from the last of Maman's litters. Maybe it was because she was a runt like me, or maybe it was because of her sweet temperament, but I'd always had a soft spot for her. I couldn't resist tickling her stomach until her giggles signaled she was awake. Then I poked and prodded the rest of the pile. The kits stretched and grumbled and did their best to ignore me. Leave me alone, cabbage breath, Darrell mumbled. He rolled over, releasing a cloud of mysterious scents from the human world. The smells clung to his fur no matter how much he groomed. He'd always been difficult, but after being assigned to transport 2 seasons earlier than normal, he'd become all but unbearable. Go away or I'll thump you good, Estelle said, stretching her heavily muscled limbs. Her bad moods were limited to the few minutes between waking up and eating breakfast, but I couldn't really blame her or Darrell for their attitudes. I'd be grumpy too if I had to wake up so soon after going to sleep, even if I knew I got to go back to bed shortly after. Maman was a stickler for family meals and insisted they'd join us even after they were up making deliveries all night. Not that they could probably sleep through our ruckus anyway. I hopped to the other side of the pile, but I didn't have any better luck over there. Rise and shine, I finally called. Last one up gets the smallest carrot. That did the trick. My siblings scrambled to right themselves. They groomed as they waited for their breakfast, smoothing their fur and licking their paws to wipe their faces. Maman had a small pile of carrots, purple carrots, from the stock we stored between the roots of the mighty chestnut tree that stretched over our burrow. My ears swiveled, betraying my agitation. We're 4 carrots short, I whispered. She leaned up against one of the burrow's hard-packed walls. We'll have to make do with half a carrot each. The seeds of anger that had been germinating in my stomach over the last several months grew taller. Our food shortages were all the humans' fault. Well, not all the humans' fault. It's possible that I might have occasionally snuck an extra carrot or 2 or 3, hoping the nutrients would initiate a growth spurt. Guilt cropped up alongside my anger, making me cringe. I'd known our supply was dwindling, but I hadn't let myself believe the committee, much less the great Maman Rabbit, would let things get this bad. Now I counted the meager stock from which Maman had pulled breakfast. If something didn't change dramatically, we'd be stuck on this half-carrot diet forever. What if the supply continues to drop? I shushed the voice in my head, unable to imagine how we'd survive on a quarter carrot each. I reared upright, stuffed this morning's carrots in my stomach pouch, and began doling out one to each pair of my siblings. If you know anything about rabbit breeds, you must already know that Montpeyroux have pouches. How else are we supposed to transport the Chou? Durrell pulled himself upright, towering over me and showing off the naturally muscled hind legs that had grown even stronger after he was assigned to transport. Who made you the carrot boss? Usually his snarky comments didn't ruffle my fur. I always helped Maman when I could, hoping to prove my worth. Today Durrell's comment stung. I wasn't the carrot boss. I was more like the carrot thief. Don't let it bother you, Sophie whispered. I tucked my head in and moved on, leaving behind Durrell's grumbling about our skimpy meal and how it was high time we went on strike. No one was more unhappy with the humans than I was, but without a way to communicate with them, a strike wouldn't do any good. We crunched our way through breakfast, ignoring Claire's complaints that Bella wasn't sharing the greens and crowding around Victor to ooh and ah when he announced he had a loose tooth. I'm still hungry, Estelle said after we finished eating. Cries of, me too, filled the burrow. Maman sighed. We'll have to forage. I groaned right along with my siblings. Foraging meant leaving the safety of the warren. Transport duty isn't without its dangers, but most of that time is spent in the tunnels. Lingering in the open is an invitation for trouble. Foraging also meant upset stomachs all around. We could technically eat clover and some of the vegetation outside the warren, but none of it settled well. Besides, nothing we found in the forest matched the nutritional value of the purple carrots we needed to thrive. Not that there were any choice, but my ribs practically poked through my coat. Out we go, Maman said. Let's be quick about it. The Chou won't grow themselves. We grumbled under our breath as we filed outside. Though the sun was already overhead and the transport rabbits reported an extreme heat spell across the country, temperatures inside the warren stayed temperate year-round. Hundreds of rows of Chou stretched out in front of us, dotting the landscape in colors ranging from light and green of the baby sprouts to the dark purple of the Chou ready for the harvest. Other rabbits emerged from dozens of burrows circling the field. Where we normally called out cheerful salutations as we made our way to our workstations, today we greeted each other with frightened nods as we swallowed our smattering of ecotropes and hopped through the warren's exit. The normally sweet, slightly milky, Chou-scented air was tinged with the rank smell of fear. Our foraging often attracted predators. Despite the warren's healing magic, all of us had lost loved ones. Our burrow was no exception. We lost Papa and Grandmaman to the dangers of the woods. Maman claims that Grandpapa died of old age, but I heard her telling a friend that he died after a broken heart, after losing Grandmaman. If only we were still the size of the Angora Rex, they could deliver 10 Chou in a single night without breaking a sweat. They were so big and so strong that when the ground cracked open, a Rex stretched herself across the gap, holding it together until the great Maman Rabbit could mend it. Another time it rained for so many days and nights that an Angora Rex stuck one pair of every animal in the country in her pouch and floated until things dried out. Then again, the carrots the Rex ate were the size of a human's arm. That was before the plague that wiped out all the giant carrots and the Angora Rex along with them, leaving only a few crops of puny carrots behind. The committee claimed this forced the great Maman Rabbit to create us, but I wasn't so sure. If Great Maman Rabbit was that powerful, why didn't she just save the Rex or the carrots in the first place? Even if it was true, she obviously didn't count on the greedy humans starving us to death. Maman said they probably weren't doing it on purpose, but I found that hard to believe too. They might not have been able to control the larger carrots disappearing, but they could definitely add more of the smaller carrots to each bundle, or ask for more children. Either one would go a long way towards solving our problems. I shook my head, realizing it was in the clouds again. Maman said I had to learn to focus on the task at hand. I followed my siblings through the shimmering air between the two massive evergreens. Everything outside the warren felt different. It was more than the sweltering heat, more than the stark colors of the flowers dotting the meadow, more than the crunch of the unseen animal treading on the pine-scented needles that had fallen in the forest surrounding the meadow. The entire world was sharper, more foreboding, less magic. My whiskers twitched and my stomach twisted. Stop with the collywobbles, I lectured myself. Maman was forever telling me not to let my imagination run away. Right now, I needed to keep my wits about me, focusing on filling my belly, and then my pouch, and then getting back to the warren. Mama stood guard at the warren's entrance, keeping watch for predators. The heat had crisped much of the clover, making it dry and crunchy, and even less suitable than usual for eating. Durrell and Estelle and the rest of the transport rabbits quickly claimed the few green patches nearby, forcing the rest of us to spread out. Within moments, the whole of the meadow had been taken over. I scanned the clearing and finally spotted a small patch of greens all the way on the other side. I hated to venture that far from the warren's entrance, but my stomach insisted. Fear forced me to eat at twice my normal pace. Still, I took care not to nibble so much as a whisker's worth of the tempest lace that grew along the edge of the clover. My ears swiveled constantly, monitoring for danger. Every rustle of leaves could be a bear's or wolf's approach, or the hawk that had plagued us all summer. A dozen times I nearly bolted for the warren. The sun beat down on my back, sweat pooled in my mouth, causing me to drool in a most unappealing manner. My bitter thoughts returned. We shouldn't have spent all our time and energy going Chou for the humans. We should be growing carrots for ourselves. When I brought up the idea of getting our paws on some purple carrot seeds, the committee only thanked me and sent me on my way. To be fair, they also said they couldn't risk upsetting the natural balance and that they'd ask the great Maman Rabbit for guidance. But it was clear they had no intention of entertaining my suggestion. Why do they think you have to be old and great to have good ideas? No matter, the idea was a good one, and I was going to see it through, as soon as I figured out how. Maman rapidly thumped her hind foot, warning us of danger. Pandemonium broke out as the rabbits lunged toward the warren. My heart thumped, thumped, thumped in my chest. I scanned the deep blue sky, then the tree line. A large red fox slunk, trunk to trunk. My nose twitched. My legs trembled. Even moving at top speed, I'd never make it back to the warren in time. There weren't any bushes or holes nearby to hide in. Foxes didn't usually go after full-grown Angora, but even at 12 seasons, I was less than half-grown. That's when I noticed Sophie. Sweet Sophie. Tired, hot, hungry Sophie, small enough that a fox wouldn't hesitate to attack. Instead of fleeing, she huddled, frozen in fear. Her bright white coat stood out in the crunchy brown grass. "Sophie!" I yelled. The fox darted toward her, its mouth open, anticipating her neck. A large stick rested between Sophie and the fox. That was it. My only chance to save her. I gathered my strength and jumped. The forest fell silent. The fox's sharp teeth glinted in the sunlight. Sophie's wide eyes shined in fear. The same eyes she'd refused to open that very morning, the same eyes that shined softly as she begged me to play hop-skip with her, the same eyes that filled with laughter when Marcel told a joke or with tears when a wasp stung the tip of her nose. I came down on the stick, snapping the world back into motion. The other end flew up, catching the fox in the chin. Thwap! The fox yelped as its head jerked back, slowing its momentum. Then a blur came out of nowhere. Durrell stood on his hind legs and boxed the fox with his front legs, one quick strike after another. The fox tucked its tail and ran for the woods. "That's right," Durrell shouted. "You get out of here and don't come back." He executed a series of adrenaline-filled binkies, flipping and twisting his body every which way. We might be a special breed created by the great Maman Rabbit to raise and deliver Chou, but that doesn't mean we don't still act like rabbits. "Come on," Mama cried from the warren's entrance. "Get your tails in here." Durrell nosed Sophie, who didn't utter so much as a squeak as she crossed the meadow. He stuck close to her on one side, and I hopped along on the other, shaking at the thought of how close we'd come to losing her. Inside the warren, rabbits gathered around us. "Holy cottontails!" someone shouted. "That was close!" "You saved her," another rabbit said. "Way to show that fox what's what." Now that I was safely inside the warren, some of my fear started to melt away. My ears stood tall and proud. I'd saved Sophie. Without me, Durrell wouldn't have caught up in time. Maman burst into the circle. "What were you thinking, hopping so far from the warren?" She rested her forehead against Sophie's. "I don't know what I would have done if I lost you." "I'm fine, Maman," Sophie said. "Durrell saved me." She pressed up against him. "You're my hero." "It was nothing," Durrell said, swelling to about 10 times his normal size. "Hey." "Two," I said. "Thanks for trying, Quincy," Sophie said. "For trying? Trying?" My ears lay back against my head. Chaos broke out amongst the rest of the rabbits as they began talking, each sharing what they witnessed and asking Durrell to replay the whole thing in slow motion. Nobody cared that I'd slowed down the fox, that without me Sophie would have been fox food before Jarrell reached her. I backed through the crowd, hoping someone would notice. I was outside the cluster when Maman called for calm. Even though her ears aren't big enough for her to be a committee member, every rabbit in the warren knows when she gives an order that they had better listen. That's quite enough excitement for one day, she said. Let's deliver breakfast to the committee and get to work. I dug in my pouch for clover before remembering I'd been so busy stuffing my face that I hadn't harvested any before the fox attacked. I ducked my head, hoping Maman wouldn't notice. As she collected what the other rabbits had gathered, my stomach lurched, already complaining about the horrible menu. It's your fault we're hungry in the first place, the unwelcome voice whispered at the back of my head. I tried to swat the words away, but there was no denying the truth. The carrot shortage wasn't my fault, but if I hadn't eaten more than my fair share, there would be more to go around. My stomach hurts, Sophie said. Can I take the day off? Several of my siblings groaned in agreement. Maman licked Sophie's cheek. I'm sorry, she said. I know this isn't easy, but the Chou won't wait. Now, does anyone else have clover? Her gaze fell on me. I busied myself cleaning a paw, and she sighed. Very well, then. Go to work. My stomach twisted again, and I felt a familiar flash of resentment. It didn't make sense to spend all our time farming Chou. Just because the committee didn't like the idea of adding a crop of purple carrots didn't mean it wouldn't work. Sophie's words replayed in my head. Thanks for trying, Quincy. If I was ever going to get her or any rabbit in the warren to respect me, I was going to have to prove myself, to do something no one else had done. An idea took shape in my mind. In order to pull it off, I'd need purple carrot seeds, seeds that only the humans had. I gulped. Sneaking into the human world would mean leaving the warren without permission, which was strictly forbidden, and more than a little dangerous. But I had to save us, even if it meant breaking a rule or two along the way. If you want to find out what happens to Quincy and the rest of the rabbits in the warren, you're going to want to pick up a copy of this book and read it. It is lovely, and I'm certain you are going to enjoy it. But now, let's head over and have a conversation with the author, Jessica Vitalis. All right, readers, we are here with author Jessica Vitalis. Jessica, thank you so much for being here and talking with us today.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Awesome. Well, we're just going to dive right into these 5 questions. So we just listened to chapter 1 of The Rabbit's Gift, but I know that it is and I'm digging over here in my book pile, I know that it is a companion novel to The Wolf's Curse. So I'm wondering if you can tell us a little bit about that. Like, how is a companion novel different than a sequel? And also, when you were writing The Wolf's Curse, did you know there would be more to the story? Did you already have that kind of seed planted?
Sure. So when I think of sequels, I usually think of stories that are continuations of the previous story. So usually it's the same characters and the same plot continuing to explore kind of the same themes. Whereas companion novels tend to be familiar in the sense that you recognize the setting or you recognize the character, but the authors are really trying to explore something different. So in the case of The Rabbit's Gift, I knew that I was going to be writing a companion novel to The Wolf's Curse. As I was writing The Wolf's Curse, I always had this thought in my head that it would be super cool to do a companion novel, but because The Wolf's Curse is a twist on Grim Reaper mythology, I really wanted to do something different, maybe the opposite of that. And birth mythology didn't feel quite right for the middle grade market and for kids. So I wasn't really sure that it was going to be possible. And I went ahead and I started talking to friends about ideas that they had and sort of complaining that I couldn't think of anything. And then a friend said, well, what about the French mythology about how babies are born in cabbage plants? And in fact, she specifically referred me to a French film called La Fille à Chou, which is a film that was made in 1896. It's a 1-minute black and white silent film. And the filmmaker dresses up as a fairy, and she sort of prances around and plucks babies from cabbage plants and drops them on the ground. And as soon as I saw that, I was absolutely hooked. And I knew that I was going to write a companion novel where I would have cabbage plants and I would have rabbits, and it would just be the opposite of The Wolf's Curse.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. And death and then birth, like that. It all ties so nicely together. And I'm a child of the 80s, and so I just keep thinking of Cabbage Patch dolls and
Yeah.
those commercials and the doll that I had. And so as an older reader who was reading the middle grade book, I loved that. When I was reading your bio in order to prepare for this interview, I learned that writing wasn't your first career. And also that writing fantasy for middle graders wasn't the first kind of book that you tried. You said you tried, a bunch of different other age levels and some other different genres. So I'm wondering if you could just tell us a little bit about that journey and like that persistence to like keep trying something just in a different way. And then once you got to middle grade fantasy, like how did you know like, oh, this is my thing. This is what I'm supposed to do.
Sure. My journey has been long and twisty. I always wrote, but writing as a career was never something I considered. Back when I was young, there wasn't technology. I didn't know that authors were real people. And it wasn't until I got to university and a professor asked me to write an essay for one of his college textbooks that I started to think, oh, maybe this is something that I could do someday. But still, I dove into this business career that I had. And it really wasn't until I had children and I was trying to sort of figure out what I wanted to be when I grew up that I realized something was missing from my life. And the thing that was missing was books and literature and the writing that I had so loved when I was younger. So at that time, I thought I'll be a picture book author because I was reading lots of picture books to my young children. I absolutely loved them. So I started writing picture books and I was taking them to my critique partners. I joined a critique group, and almost every time I brought them a new story, they would say, "This is great. It sounds exactly like the first chapter in a middle grade novel." Needless to say, that's not what I wanted to hear. So I thought, okay, well, this keeps happening over and over. Maybe this is the universe trying to tell me something. And I decided to check out these middle grade novels because I hadn't read a middle grade novel since I was in middle school. And the first book that I picked up was called Kit's Wilderness. It's a book by David Almond. And I was just absolutely captivated. And I knew immediately that that was going to be my sweet spot in the types of stories that I wanted to tell. What I didn't know was how to actually tell those stories. So the first book I wrote after that, the first manuscript, was actually a YA story, but I didn't really know enough about the market to know that that's what I was writing. So it took a lot of years for me to figure out what the market was like, what it meant to write middle grade, how to tell those stories. In fact, it actually took me 13 years from when I started writing picture books until I got my first book deal.
Wow. Wow, but you just kept going. That's so great.
Yeah, and
Okay.
I kept telling myself along the way, the only thing that would guarantee that I would never get published was if I quit writing. So I figured I couldn't guarantee that I would get published, but I could make sure I kept improving my craft and kept trying.
That's such great advice. Awesome. Okay, so this story, you said is based on a French myth.
Mhm.
And I know that a lot of people really enjoy writing things like fan fiction, where you're taking bits and pieces of other people's stories and they're making them theirs. And so when you do a retelling, like a fairy tale retelling or a myth retelling, how do you balance how much of the old story you use and how much of your own creation do you use?
That's a great question. I think for me, a lot of that was guided by my wish to make sure that I was writing something that felt like a companion novel to The Wolf's Curse. So I knew that I was going to do a spin on this mythology, but I wasn't really excited about the idea of using a fairy to tell my story. In The Wolf's Curse, the wolf was actually an omniscient narrator. So I felt like I needed to have another omniscient narrator. And then I thought, well, then I'll use an animal. And so the story just kind of built from there that I picked a rabbit. And I would say I went through much the same process actually writing The Wolf's Curse because that was a spin on Grim Reaper mythology. So a lot of it, it's taking what you know and asking yourself, what if? So for me, I didn't want to write this scary Grim Reaper figure. And I thought, well, what if I make my Grim Reaper a woman? What if I make my Grim Reaper a wolf? And so I think that's the place to start with retellings, is to figure out what story you're telling, what you like about it, the things that it's really important for you to keep, and then maybe the things that you don't like or that you think it would be interesting to change and play with. And I think that can sort of guide your writing process.
Yeah, that reminds me of a strategy I've used somewhere else in relation to non-writing things, but it's called grow, hold, fold. Like, what do you want to grow? What do you want to hold the same? And what do you want to fold and get rid of? Yeah, I just that it's very helpful the way you said it reminded me of something else. So hopefully readers and writers can take that into their own work.
Yes.
Um, Also, what you're talking about was a great segue into my next question, and that is that in both The Wolf's Curse and The Rabbit's Gift, um, you have animal characters and you also have human characters. And so I'm wondering, which do you have a favorite? Do you like writing human characters or animal characters better? And like, are there things that are tricky or great about each one?
Do I have a favorite? So here's the interesting thing. Before I started writing The Wolf's Curse, I wasn't a huge fan of animal stories. I don't even know that I had read that many. So this was kind of new territory for me. The Wolf's Curse was a little bit different than a typical story because the wolf is, well, I don't want to give too much away, but she has a lot of human-like qualities. So I found that writing the wolf was really a lot like writing any other character. She had to
Mm-hmm.
have the same character arc. She had to have the same types of wants and needs as any human. Now, when I got to The Rabbit's Gift, I told you earlier that I thought I had to write a story with another omniscient narrator. But when I started writing my rabbit character, writing little Quincy Rabbit as an omniscient narrator made it feel too derivative of Wolf. And my readers kept telling me this feels like just the same story, but you've made it a rabbit. It feels like the same character. So I decided to um, make Quincy a type third person, which means I decided to delve into his viewpoint so he didn't know everything. And so that was quite a different experience because I really was trying to think like a rabbit. And I knew that I didn't want to write the entire book from that perspective. So I ended up doing dual perspective and alternating between a rabbit and a human. And it was challenging to try to think about how do rabbits think? What would he be seeing? But it was also a lot of fun. And I would say, again, it really comes back to no matter what type of character you have, they all need to go through the same type of character arc. So in that sense, it really, there isn't any difference for me between writing animals and human characters.
Well, I thought you did both wonderfully. I'd never thought about what it would feel like to be a rabbit either, but I can tell you that you pulled it off because I was there in the burrow and in the tunnels, and I thought it was great. So good job.
Thank you. I'm so happy to hear that.
My last question for you is my question for you coming as a word nerd. I call myself the word nerd, and I love that all throughout the story, you would have these big and delicious words in your story, and then sometimes you would include a footnote, and like sometimes you would be telling the reader how to say a word, or how to how to pronounce it. Sometimes you'd be telling us a definition, but it wasn't like a dictionary definition. It was how the character would describe that word. And I'm just curious why you decided to do that. And like at what point in time did that become a part of the draft? Was it always in your plan or how did that evolve?
Yeah, that was again another effort to make this book feel like a companion novel to The Wolf's Curse. I wanted it to have a familiar feel to the reader. So I decided that I was going to have this little runt of a rabbit who had this enormous vocabulary. He's very, very smart and he uses big fancy words. But in The Wolf's Curse, I have quite a lot of footnotes. And those footnotes are more used for developing the wolf's personality, just kind of funny, snarky asides. And again, I didn't want to make this book feel too much like The Wolf's Curse. So I thought, well, how can I incorporate some footnotes for Quincy Rabbit in a way that would feel really realistic to his character? So then I realized that it would just be a lot of fun if there were little footnotes that were sort of his spin on telling you why he liked to use these fancy words or how to pronounce them. So it was an effort to develop his personality a little bit more.
I love it. I love it. And teachers like loads of opportunity for vocabulary lessons with this book. So definitely check into it for that, for lit circles or read aloud or whatnot. So Jessica, thank you so much for your time here with us. Before we go, if you could just tell us a little bit, what are you working on now or what's coming out next from you? And if a reader has another question that I haven't asked that they want to ask you, what is the best way for them to get in touch with you?
Sure. My next book is Coyote Queen or Coyote Queen, depending on where you live in the world. People say it differently. It comes out next fall of 2023. And it's the story of a young girl who lives in Wyoming, and she joins a beauty pageant to escape her abusive stepfather. But then she turns out that she's turning into a coyote. So it's quite a lot different than these first two books. It's contemporary with a little twist of magic, but still a whole lot of fun. So you can find me on my website at www.jessicavitalis.com, or I'm often on Twitter, and my handle is at Jessica Vitalis.
Awesome. I will be sure to link both of those things down there, and we'll be so excited to read that book as well. Thank you so much for joining us, and please keep writing amazing books. Readers, we'll see you again next time for another First Chapter Friday.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
To continue reading The Rabbit's Gift, pick up a copy from your school library, purchase one from a local indie bookstore, or grab it via the link in the description box below. Then be sure to check out the rest of the First Chapter Friday playlist. I have tons of great middle grade, young adult, and author interviews waiting for you. This week's mystery quote says, "Sometimes the only difference between a hero and a villain is which side you're on." Thanks so much for joining me on my channel, Learning with the Word Nerd. I hope you'll come back again for more First Chapter Friday videos, brain breaks, and other great content. You can find me online at these places, which I've linked below. See you again next time, and happy reading!